I need help, any pilot aboard. The co-pilot's scared voice broke the silence at 32,000 feet. Their captain had collapsed. A quiet woman in seat 23C stood up. When F-22 fighter jets came to help and she said 2 words on the radio, America's best fighter pilots went completely silent. That name was legendary. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe / for more amazing stories. The Boeing 767 cruised through thin air at 32,000 feet, its fuselage a pressurized tube of ordinary human existence suspended in the killing cold of the upper atmosphere. Flight 2847 from Seattle to Boston carried 189 souls through darkness over Montana, passengers engaged in the mundane activities of modern air travel, reading paperbacks, watching movies on seatback screens, sleeping against inflatable pillows, sipping ginger ale from plastic cups. The cabin lights had been dimmed for the overnight crossing, creating an artificial twilight that encouraged rest. In seat 23C, a woman in her mid-40s sat quietly reading a thriller novel, her jean jacket folded in the overhead bin, her plain gray t-shirt and comfortable pants marking her as just another passenger making the transcontinental journey. She'd politely declined the flight attendant's offer of wine during dinner service, accepted water instead, made brief small talk with the businessman in 23B about Seattle's rain without mentioning that she'd spent the previous week at Boeing Field reviewing classified aircraft specifications. Nothing about her suggested anything beyond ordinary civilian existence. Her name was Sarah Chen, though that wasn't the name that mattered. The call sign she'd earned 17 years ago through actions above the Taiwan Strait had become legend, studied in classified briefings at every fighter weapons school on Earth, whispered with reverence in ready rooms from Nellis to Lakenheath, invoked as the standard against which impossible victories were measured. But here, at 32,000 feet aboard a commercial flight, she was just another passenger, invisible and unremarkable, exactly as she preferred when traveling outside military channels. The businessman beside her had no idea he was sitting next to someone whose tactical innovations appeared in doctrine manuals he'd never be cleared to read. The flight attendant who'd served her chicken or pasta had no concept that she was pouring beverages for someone whose name triggered immediate recognition protocols among the world's most elite aviators. In the cockpit, Captain Tom Morrison, a 23-year veteran with United Airlines, was discussing routing changes with First Officer Brad Keating when the massive embolism tore through his brain with the sudden violence of artillery fire. One moment he was reaching forward to adjust his heading display, the next his entire left side went completely slack as the blood clot destroyed critical tissue with catastrophic efficiency. His hand spasmed against the control yoke, dragging it forward as his body weight collapsed against the instrument panel. The Boeing's nose pitched down violently. "Tom!" Keating shouted, grabbing for the controls as the aircraft entered an uncommanded descent. "Tom, what's wrong? Talk to me." Morrison made a terrible gurgling sound, his eyes rolling back as his body continued slumping forward, preventing Keating from pulling the yoke back to level flight. The artificial horizon showed 8 degrees nose down and increasing. The altitude indicator began unwinding, 31,800 feet, 31,600, descending at over 2,000 feet per minute into an emergency dive that would eventually exceed structural limits if not corrected immediately. "Captain Morrison." "Tom." Keating released his right hand from his own control yoke, reaching across to physically push Morrison's torso away from the controls while simultaneously trying to level the aircraft with his left hand alone. Morrison's deadweight slumped against the center console, blocking access to critical switches and communication panels. His left arm draped across the throttle quadrant. Keating managed to haul him partially upright but couldn't hold him there while also flying the aircraft. The moment he released Morrison to grab his own controls with both hands, the captain collapsed forward again. The cockpit door alert chimed as Senior Flight Attendant Jennifer Walsh responded to the emergency call button that Keating had managed to slap with his elbow during the struggle. She opened the reinforced door using her emergency access code, took one look at the situation, and her professional composure cracked into genuine alarm. "Medical emergency, Captain down," she called back toward the cabin. "Lisa, get the AED and medical kit, now. Help me move him," Keating grunted, wrestling Morrison's limp form while trying to maintain visual reference with his instruments. The Boeing had leveled somewhat but was still descending through 30,000 feet, the autopilot disengaged by Morrison's spasmodic movements, the flight management system chirping warnings about deviation from assigned altitude. "I need him out of the controls so I can fly." Walsh squeezed into the cramped cockpit space, grabbing Morrison under the arms and hauling backward with all her strength. At 5'6" and 130 pounds, she struggled against the captain's much larger frame, but desperation provided strength. She managed to drag him far enough back that Keating could reach his controls properly, could pull the yoke back and arrest their descent at 29,300 feet. Altitude alerts were screaming. Denver Center was calling on the radio demanding explanation for their deviation. Morrison's legs blocked the aisle between the two pilot seats. "Get him on the floor, start CPR if he's not breathing," Keating ordered, his voice tight with controlled panic as he fumbled for the radio switch while simultaneously scanning instruments and trying to reconfigure the autopilot. "I need to declare emergency, coordinate descent, figure out where we're landing, Jesus, there's too much happening." Another flight attendant, Lisa Martinez, rushed forward with the automated external defibrillator and emergency medical kit. She dropped to her knees beside Morrison in the impossibly confined space, checking for pulse and breathing while Walsh used the intercom to call for medical professionals among the passengers. In the cabin, automated announcements about remaining seated during turbulence still played on loop while the flight attendants' urgent calls for doctors created surreal dissonance. "Denver Center, United 2847, declaring emergency," Keating transmitted, his voice professionally controlled despite the chaos surrounding him. "Captain incapacitated, medical emergency, requesting priority handling and vectors for immediate landing, nearest suitable airport." The controller's response came immediately, trained professionalism meeting crisis management. "United 2847, Denver Center copies emergency declaration, Squawk 7700, cleared direct billings Logan International, vectors on request, emergency services will be standing by. Say souls on board and fuel remaining. 189 souls, fuel for approximately 3 more hours normal cruise," Keating replied, already programming the flight management system for billings while simultaneously managing the descent and trying to avoid looking at Morrison's gray face while Martinez performed chest compressions with mechanical precision. The cockpit had become a nightmare space where he was trying to be 3 people simultaneously, pilot flying the aircraft, pilot managing emergencies and communications, and medical coordinator for a dying man whose body occupied precious operational space. The AED's automated voice cut through the chaos, analyzing heart rhythm. "Do not touch the patient." Martinez lifted her hands. The device paused for endless seconds. "Shock advised. Stand clear." The terrible thump of electrical discharge. Morrison's body jerked. Martinez immediately resumed compressions, counting under her breath, her face set in professional determination that couldn't quite hide her fear. Keating ran through mental calculations with growing dread. Billings was 23 minutes away at their current speed and altitude. He needed to descend the aircraft from cruise altitude to landing configuration. He needed to brief the cabin for emergency landing. He needed to coordinate with company operations about captain incapacitation. He needed to review approach plates for an airport he'd never landed at before. He needed to configure the aircraft systems for single-pilot operation. He needed to monitor Morrison's medical crisis and direct the flight attendants' efforts. He needed to run emergency checklists that were designed for 2-pilot operations. He needed to do 6 impossible things simultaneously while flying a jet carrying 189 people who depended absolutely on his competence during circumstances that exceeded his training. The realization crystallized with terrible clarity: he couldn't do this alone. Not safely. Not without help from someone who understood aviation, who could handle the coordination and communication and system management while he focused exclusively on the flying. Single-pilot operations in emergencies were theoretically possible, but this, captain down, CPR in progress, emergency descent, unfamiliar airport, nighttime conditions, passengers in panic, this exceeded what any one pilot could manage without assistance. His hand hovered over the PA microphone. Protocol said maintain passenger calm, don't reveal crew incapacitation, project confidence and control. But protocol was written for scenarios where the remaining crew could actually handle the situation. This wasn't that scenario. This was desperation time, when survival meant abandoning protocol for brutal honesty. Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Keating in the cockpit. His voice transmitted throughout the cabin with a tension that immediately silenced every conversation, stopped every movie, jerked every sleeping passenger awake with primitive awareness that something was catastrophically wrong. We have a serious medical emergency. Our captain has collapsed and is receiving CPR. I am flying the aircraft and declaring emergency for immediate landing in Billings, Montana. However, I need assistance. If there are any qualified pilots aboard this aircraft, military, commercial, cargo, any aviation qualification, I am requesting you identify yourself immediately to the flight attendants. I need someone with aviation expertise to provide emergency assistance in the cockpit. This is not optional. We need help right now. The cabin erupted into controlled chaos. Passengers who'd been peacefully reading or sleeping 5 minutes ago now processed the horrifying reality that their captain was dying or dead, that their sole conscious pilot was admitting he needed help, that their massive aircraft hurtling through darkness at hundreds of miles per hour had insufficient crew to manage whatever crisis they were experiencing. Parents grabbed children. Business travelers checked seatbelts with sudden urgent attention. Several people began crying. The flight attendants moved through the aisles with practiced calm that barely concealed their own fear, scanning faces, looking for anyone who might possess aviation qualifications. In seat 23C, Sarah Chen closed her novel and sat perfectly still, processing the situation with the tactical assessment capabilities that had made her legendary. Captain incapacitated, definitive medical crisis requiring immediate landing. First officer declaring emergency, proper procedure, demonstrates good judgment under pressure. Request for pilot assistance, indicates situation exceeds single pilot capacity, suggests co-pilot recognizes limitations and is willing to request help, positive sign of professional competence rather than dangerous pride. Aircraft handling, she'd felt the initial dive, the recovery, the subsequent leveling, all executed adequately but with the roughness of someone managing too many tasks simultaneously. The businessman in 23B turned to her with pale face. This is really bad, isn't it? The pilot asked for help. They never do that. She nodded slowly. It means he's being honest about his capacity. That's actually a good sign. Better than someone who pretends they can handle more than they actually can. Are you calm? He said, studying her face. You're incredibly calm. How are you so calm? Because she'd flown combat missions where her tactical decisions determined whether her wingmen lived or died, where split-second calculations meant victory or catastrophic failure, where the margin between triumph and disaster measured in milliseconds. Because she'd coordinated strikes against targets that shooting 17 aircraft in 43 minutes while coordinating 4 separate elements and managing weapons systems that most pilots never fired in anger. Because compared to aerial combat against numerically superior forces, a commercial aircraft with one pilot down was a crisis but not an impossible one, provided someone with sufficient expertise could organize the chaos. I'm just a calm flyer, she said neutrally, already standing and moving toward the front of the cabin. She caught Jennifer Walsh's attention near row 12. I can help, she said quietly. I'm a qualified pilot. The first officer requested aviation assistance. I'm offering. Walsh assessed her with the rapid judgment of someone trained to read people in crisis. Something in Chen's posture, her controlled calm amid cabin panic, her direct eye contact and professional bearing triggered recognition of military bearing even without uniform. What's your background? Military. Fighter pilot. Qualified in high-performance aircraft. Experienced in crisis management and emergency procedures. I can coordinate communications, manage systems, handle navigation and checklist procedures while he focuses on flying. That's what he needs right now, someone to handle everything except the actual stick and rudder work so he can concentrate on getting us safely on the ground. Walsh made the decision in 2 seconds. Follow me. What's your name? Sarah Chen. She didn't mention her call sign. Didn't mention her rank. Didn't mention the classified missions or the legendary actions or the fact that her name appeared in briefings that Walsh would never be cleared to read. Just her name, simple and civilian, as unremarkable as she'd been for the entire flight until this moment when invisibility had to end because people needed her. Walsh led her forward through the cabin where passengers watched with desperate hope that maybe this woman could help, maybe she was the miracle that would bring them safely home. Chen moved with quiet purpose, not rushing but not hesitating, military discipline evident in every step. At the reinforced cockpit door, Walsh used her credentials to open it, leaning inside. Brad, this woman says she's a military fighter pilot, qualified to assist. Sarah Chen. Should I send her in? Keating glanced back desperately, his face gleaming with sweat as he juggled controls and radio communications while Martinez continued compressions on Morrison's motionless form. Yes. God, yes, send her in. I need someone who understands aviation. Please. Chen stepped into the cockpit and immediately assessed the tactical situation with the instant processing that had made her legendary. Morrison down, receiving CPR, prognosis unclear but not immediately relevant to aircraft operations. First officer managing controls adequately but overloaded with simultaneous tasks. Aircraft stable but requiring constant attention. Multiple urgent requirements competing for single pilot's focus. Solution: divide responsibilities, establish clear command structure, allow Keating to focus exclusively on flying while she managed everything else. First Officer Keating, I'm Sarah Chen, former military fighter pilot, she said calmly, her voice cutting through the chaos with command authority that instantly transformed the cockpit atmosphere. I'm here to assist. You focus exclusively on flying the aircraft. I'll handle all communications, navigation coordination, checklist procedures, and systems management. You fly, I'll coordinate everything else. Tell me what you need. Keating felt 30 tons of pressure lift from his shoulders as someone with actual aviation expertise offered to share the overwhelming burden. Oh, thank God. Okay. We're cleared. Direct Billings, descending to 10,000 feet, emergency services standing by. I need you to coordinate with Denver Center on frequency 134.75, brief them on our status, coordinate approach procedures. I need the approach plates for Billings runway 10L briefed and set up. I need someone monitoring our descent profile while I focus on flying. I need passenger cabin briefed for emergency landing. Can you do all that? Absolutely. Consider it done. Chen moved to the jump seat behind Keating, strapping in and reaching for the spare headset. Her hands moved across the communication panel with practiced precision, selecting the correct frequency, adjusting volume. You focus on flying. I've got everything else. She keyed the radio with the confidence of someone who'd coordinated combat operations over hostile territory. Denver Center, United 2847, this is passenger assist pilot now coordinating communications and navigation. First officer is pilot flying and handling all aircraft control. I'll be managing all radio communications, systems coordination, and approach procedures. Confirming emergency status, requesting current vectors and approach clearance for Billings Logan runway 10L. The controller's response came with professional calm that barely concealed his surprise at the unusual situation. United 2847, Denver Center copies passenger assist pilot on communications. Confirm you are qualified pilot providing emergency assistance. Affirmative. Military background, qualified in high-performance aircraft, experienced in emergency procedures. I'll coordinate all communications and procedures while First Officer maintains aircraft control. Roger, 2847. Maintain heading 075, descend and maintain 10,000 feet. Billings weather currently 3 miles visibility, ceiling 4,000 broken, winds light and variable. Emergency equipment standing by. Expect ILS runway 10L approach. Chen copied the clearance with precision, then immediately shifted to coordinating with Keating. Brad, you heard that. Heading 075, descend and maintain 10,000. I'm pulling up the approach plates now, I'll brief the procedure once we're established on descent. How's the aircraft handling? Good, she's flying fine, Keating said, his voice steadier now that someone competent was managing the chaos. Fuel's adequate, all systems normal except, my captain's getting CPR. How's he doing, Jennifer? Walsh looked up from where she'd relieved Martinez on compressions. Still no pulse. We've shocked him twice. We're continuing CPR but... She didn't finish. Didn't need to. Everyone in the cockpit understood that Morrison's chances decreased with every passing minute. Chen filed that information without emotional reaction, another data point in the tactical situation requiring immediate management. Understood. Jennifer, continue CPR until we land or until medical protocols say stop. Lisa, I need you to brief the cabin for emergency landing, standard procedures, brace positions, follow crew instructions after landing. Keep them calm but honest. Tell them we're landing in Billings in approximately 20 minutes. Go. The flight attendants moved immediately, responding to command authority that brooked no hesitation. Chen had spent 2 decades giving orders that determined life or death outcomes. Managing a commercial emergency landing fell well within her operational experience even if the aircraft type was different from anything she'd personally flown. She pulled up the approach plates on the electronic flight bag mounted beside the jump seat, studying the ILS procedure for Billings runway 10L with the rapid comprehension of someone who'd learned to process tactical information at supersonic speeds. Minimum altitude 2,400 feet. Decision height 200 feet above touchdown. Final approach course 099 degrees. She memorized the critical parameters in seconds, then began coordinating the approach briefing with Keating. Brad, approach brief for Billings 10L, ILS approach, final approach course 099, decision height 200 feet, touchdown zone elevation is 3,652 feet. Field elevation 3,652. Tower frequency 119.65, ground 121.9. Emergency equipment will be standing by on runway. After landing, expect to remain on runway for emergency vehicle access to the aircraft. Standard evacuation procedures only if you call for it or if emergency vehicles direct it. You comfortable with the approach? Yeah, I've flown ILS approaches 1,000 times. Having you coordinate this makes everything manageable. Thank you. What did you say your background was? Military fighter pilot, Chen said without elaboration. Managed a lot of high-stress situations. This one's urgent but very manageable with proper coordination. What did you fly? If you don't mind me asking. She hesitated fractionally, then decided to keep it vague. Various platforms. Fast jets. Tactical operations. Let's focus on getting us on the ground, then we can discuss aviation backgrounds. Keating nodded, accepting the deflection. Truth was, he didn't care if she'd flown fighters or cargo planes or attack helicopters. She had the situational awareness and command presence that made everything suddenly manageable. Her voice was calm, her instructions clear, her presence transformed the cockpit from chaotic disaster into organized emergency response. Whoever she was, whatever she'd done in the military, she clearly knew her business. Over the next 15 minutes, Chen coordinated the descent with tactical precision. She managed all communications with Denver Center, obtained updated weather, coordinated the transfer to Billings approach control, briefed the flight attendants on landing procedures, monitored the descent profile to ensure Keating maintained proper altitude and speed targets, configured the flight management system for the approach, reviewed emergency evacuation procedures, and maintained constant awareness of their position relative to the airport. She never rushed, never became flustered, never showed anything except calm professional competence as she organized every aspect of the emergency except the actual flying. Keating focused entirely on controlling the aircraft, liberated from the overwhelming burden of trying to coordinate simultaneously all tasks. He flew the approach with increasing confidence, knowing that Chen was managing everything else, that if he needed information she provided instantly, that her presence in the cockpit had transformed an impossible situation into a difficult but manageable one. They were 40 miles from Billings, established on the approach, descending through 12,000 feet when the situation suddenly became more complex. Chen heard the radio frequency crackle with a new voice, military rather than civilian, distinctive in its clipped precision and tactical formality. United 2847, this is Raptor Flight, 2 F-22s monitoring your emergency. We've been tasked to provide escort and support for your approach. We're at your 5 o'clock position, 5 miles, level at 12,000 feet. Do you have us in sight? Chen and Keating both looked right, scanning the darkness. 2 sets of navigation lights appeared, impossibly close for military aircraft near civilian traffic, their positions rock-steady as they matched United 2847 speed and altitude with the precise station keeping that characterized fighter operations. Keating keyed his radio. Raptor Flight, United 2847, we have you in sight. Appreciate the support but we're managing okay. Emergency services standing by in Billings, we're established on approach. Copy, 2847. We'll maintain escort through landing. If you need anything, tactical coordination, communications relay, emergency procedure support, we're available. We understand you have passenger assist pilot coordinating operations. Chen realized the F-22 pilots were curious about the unusual situation, possibly concerned about passenger assist pilot qualifications, understandably cautious about commercial aircraft coordination during emergency. She keyed the radio, keeping her response professional and minimal. Raptor Flight, affirm, this is passenger assist pilot coordinating communications and procedures. Former military aviation, qualified for emergency support. Situation is stable, first officer is flying, all procedures normal for emergency approach. Appreciate the escort. There was brief pause on the frequency, and Chen could imagine the F-22 pilots processing former military aviation and making calculations about her likely background. Then the response came, more relaxed, copy that, 2847. Sounds like you've got things organized. We'll stay with you until you're safely on the ground. Nice to know there's military aircrew aboard helping out. Chen permitted herself the faintest smile. The Raptor pilots had instantly recognized military bearing in her radio communications, the professional terseness and tactical precision that marked someone with combat aviation background. They'd gone from mildly concerned about passenger assist qualifications to comfortable that one of their own was coordinating the emergency. Fighter pilot fraternity recognized its members even across different aircraft types and service branches. Billings Approach Control cleared them for the ILS-10L approach. Chen coordinated the frequency change, briefed Keating on the final approach parameters, confirmed landing gear and flap configuration points. The Boeing descended through 10,000 feet, the lights of Billings appearing ahead through scattered clouds, emergency vehicles visible as red and blue strobes positioned along the runway. Landing checklist complete, gear down, flaps 30, Chen called, monitoring the instruments while Keating flew with total concentration. On glide slope, on localizer, airspeed on target. You're flying a perfect approach, Brad. Keep it coming. Thanks for the coaching, Keating said, his hands steady on the yoke despite the terrible circumstances. Behind him, Jennifer Walsh continued performing compressions on Morrison with mechanical determination, refusing to quit even though the captain's chances diminished with every minute. The cockpit had become a strange space where death and professional competence coexisted, where tragedy and technical precision occurred simultaneously. 200 feet above decision height, continue approach, Chen called. 100 feet, runway in sight, continue. 50 feet, looking good, prepare to flare. Keating brought the Boeing across the threshold with practiced skill, flaring the nose up gently as the main landing gear kissed the runway with barely a chirp of rubber. He deployed thrust reversers and speed brakes, bringing the aircraft to smooth deceleration while Chen coordinated with Tower. Billings Tower, United 2847, were stopping on the runway at taxiway Charlie. Request emergency vehicles approach aircraft. Captain still receiving CPR, immediate medical attention required. Roger, 2847, emergency vehicles are rolling. Remain on runway, shut down engines when directed. Outstanding job bringing her in safely. The fire trucks and ambulances converged on the aircraft with flashing lights and urgent purpose. Keating shut down the engines at Chen's coordination. Paramedics rushed aboard through the forward door, taking over CPR from the exhausted flight attendants, loading Morrison onto a stretcher with swift efficiency, rushing him toward the ambulance with desperate speed that suggested they still believed resuscitation might be possible. In the cabin, passengers erupted into spontaneous applause, that strange relief reaction of people who survived genuine peril and need to express gratitude through noise. Flight attendants managed the orderly disembarkation, directing people toward buses that would transport them to the terminal while investigators began photographing the cockpit and collecting evidence for the inevitable inquiry. Keating unbuckled and turned to Chen with expression mixing profound gratitude and deep exhaustion. "You saved us. I couldn't have done this alone. I was drowning until you walked into this cockpit and organized everything." "Who are you?" "Really?" "Because that was the most professional emergency coordination I've ever experienced, and I've been flying for 12 years. Chen unbuckled slowly, suddenly aware that the crisis was over and that her anonymity had ended the moment she'd stepped forward to help. "I'm exactly who I said. Military fighter pilot, now retired. Happened to be aboard when you needed help." "Which branch? Which aircraft?" "I'm guessing Navy F divided by a -18s from the way you coordinate." She smiled slightly. "Mostly classified, Brad. Let's just say I've had some interesting assignments over the years. What matters is everyone's safe. You did excellent work flying that approach under impossible circumstances." A voice from the open cockpit door interrupted them. "United 2847, this is Captain Marcus Webb, Raptor 2 from your escort flight. Permission to enter the cockpit?" Keating looked surprised. "The F-22 pilots want to meet us." "Apparently," Chen said neutrally, though something in her posture suggested sudden wariness. Two pilots in full flight gear climbed the stairs and entered the cockpit, their presence overwhelming in the confined space, tall, fit, radiating the supreme confidence of aviators who flew the world's most advanced air superiority fighter. Captain Marcus Webb was perhaps 35, his call sign, Torch, visible on his flight suit. His wingman, Captain Diana Torres, call sign, Blade, was younger, maybe 30, her dark eyes sharp with intelligence. They both looked at Chen with undisguised curiosity. "First Officer Keating, outstanding flying sir," Webb said, shaking hands with genuine respect. "You did everything right on that approach. Textbook emergency handling." "Thank you, Captain, but honestly, I couldn't have done it without her," Keating gestured toward Chen. "She coordinated everything: communications, navigation, procedures, flight attendant coordination. Freed me up to focus entirely on flying. She's former military aviation, wouldn't tell me much beyond that." Webb and Torres both turned to Chen with sudden intense interest. "Former military aviation?" Webb said. "Which service?" "We heard you on the radio and figured military background from the way you coordinate." "Professional precision." Chen could see this going somewhere she didn't want it to go, her carefully maintained anonymity about to shatter, but these were fighter pilots and they'd helped escort the emergency and they deserved honest answers even if those answers revealed more than she preferred. "Air Force. Fighter pilot. Retired now. Happened to be aboard as passenger when the captain collapsed." "Which base were you at?" Torres asked. "Which aircraft?" "Various assignments. Multiple aircraft types. Mostly classified work." I prefer to keep specifics private if that's acceptable. Webb studied her with the kind of sharp assessment fighter pilots develop through training and combat, reading subtle cues that others missed. Something in her bearing, her economy of movement, the quiet authority that had organized a chaotic emergency, the professional precision that had impressed pilots who flew the most advanced fighters on Earth, something triggered recognition that she was significantly more than just former fighter pilot who happened to be aboard. Ma'am, I don't mean to pry, but that level of coordination doesn't come from flying routine missions. The way you managed that emergency, the command presence, the tactical precision, the situational awareness, that's someone with serious operational experience. Would I be wrong in guessing you've seen combat? Chen met his eyes steadily. You wouldn't be wrong. But I'd still prefer to keep the specifics private. Some things stay classified even after you retire. Torres glanced at Webb with expression suggesting they discussed this during the escort flight, made guesses about the mysterious passenger assist pilot whose professional competence impressed them. Ma'am, what's your call sign? If you don't mind us asking. The cockpit went very quiet. Keating looked between them with confusion, not understanding why call signs mattered. Chen felt the weight of the question, knowing that revealing her call sign would shatter any remaining anonymity, would trigger instant recognition among pilots who studied advanced tactics and combat history, would expose the legendary status she'd maintained in careful privacy for years since retiring. But these were fellow warriors who'd provided professional escort during emergency, who'd offered support and coordination, who deserved honest answer even if that answer transformed casual conversation into something far more significant. And denying her call sign felt like false modesty, like dishonoring the achievements and the legends that call sign represented. She took a slow breath, then spoke the two syllables that would change everything. Valkyrie. The reaction was instantaneous and profound. Both F-22 pilots went completely silent, their faces transforming from casual curiosity to absolute shock. Webb's mouth literally fell open. Torres stopped breathing. The cockpit became a frozen tableau as two of the world's most elite fighter pilots processed the name they just heard, their brains struggling to reconcile the casual woman standing before them with the legendary call sign that appeared in classified briefings and tactical studies and combat analyses that every fighter pilot in the world knew represented the absolute pinnacle of aerial warfare achievement. Keating looked between them, confused. What? What's Valkyrie? Why do you both look like you've seen a ghost? Webb found his voice first, though it came out rough with emotion. Valkyrie. Taiwan Strait, 2008. 17 kills in 43 minutes. 4 elements coordinated simultaneously. Outnumbered 8-1. Single-handedly prevented an invasion fleet from achieving air superiority. Changed the entire tactical doctrine for beyond visual range combat. Created maneuvers that we study at weapons school. Innovations that are still classified. The most legendary fighter pilot of the 21st century. That Valkyrie? Chen said nothing, just met his stunned gaze with quiet acknowledgement. Torres made a sound somewhere between laugh and sob. Oh my God. We just escorted Valkyrie through an emergency landing. We coordinated with Valkyrie on radio frequencies. We've been studying your tactics for 7 years. Your engagement over the strait is the first thing they teach at weapons school for multi-element coordination. You're the legend. The actual legend. And you were just sitting as passenger on a commercial flight. I do occasionally travel on commercial airlines, Chen said dryly. Hard to take an F-22 to visit family in Boston. Webb shook his head slowly, still processing. Ma'am, when you said former military aviation, that was possibly the greatest understatement in the history of understatements. Valkyrie. Jesus. Torres, do you realize we just flew escort for Valkyrie? That we're standing in a cockpit with Valkyrie? That we coordinated emergency procedures with literally the most legendary fighter pilot alive? Keating was staring at Chen with dawning comprehension. Wait, you're famous. You're some kind of fighter pilot legend? The legend, Torres corrected firmly. Not some kind. The legend. If you asked every fighter pilot in the world to name the one person they most admire, most respect, most want to fly like, at least 80% would say Valkyrie. She's who we all study. Who we all try to emulate. The standard against which impossible victories are measured. And she's been sitting in seat 23C reading a novel like she's just a regular passenger. Chen felt the familiar discomfort of having her carefully maintained privacy shattered, of becoming once again the subject of attention and reverence that she'd spent years trying to escape after retiring. I am just a regular passenger. I retired 6 years ago. I read novels and visit family and live a quiet civilian life. The person who flew that engagement over the Taiwan Strait doesn't exist anymore. She's just a name in classified files. With profound respect, ma'am, that's not how legends work, Webb said quietly. What you accomplished doesn't fade just because you retired. Those 17 kills, those tactical innovations, that impossible victory against overwhelming odds, that studied, analyzed, emulated by every fighter pilot who wants to survive combat. Your call sign means something. It represents achievement that transcends individual missions. You're Valkyrie. That name matters. An airline operations supervisor appeared at the cockpit door, tablet in hand, expression mixing concern and bureaucratic efficiency. First Officer Keating. I need to debrief the emergency for our report. Also, there are some military officials here who want to speak with you and... He glanced at Chen, the passenger who provided cockpit assistance. They're being quite insistent about speaking with her specifically. Webb and Torres exchanged glances. They monitored the radio traffic, Webb said. Heard her call sign. Word spreading through military channels that Valkyrie coordinated a civilian emergency from a commercial cockpit. Everyone's going to want to meet her, debrief her, thank her. Ma'am, your anonymity just ended pretty definitively. Chen closed her eyes briefly, accepting the inevitable. Her quiet civilian existence had lasted exactly 6 years before circumstances demanded she reveal herself, demanded she become once again the legendary Valkyrie whose name commanded instant recognition and profound respect. But people had lived because she'd stepped forward. That mattered more than privacy. That mattered more than carefully maintained anonymity. Let's go talk to whoever needs debriefing, she said calmly. Brad, you should rest. You flew an excellent approach under impossible circumstances. You should be proud. Keating grabbed her arm gently. Wait. Before we go deal with officials and debriefings. I need to say this. You saved 189 people tonight. Including me. I was drowning until you walked into that cockpit and organized everything. I don't care if you're a legend or just someone who happened to know how to help. You saved us. Thank you. Chen met his eyes and saw the genuine gratitude there, the recognition from one professional to another that competence matters more than reputation, that helping matters more than recognition. You're welcome, Brad. You did the hard part. I just coordinated. No, Webb interrupted firmly. With respect, ma'am, you did what you always do. You assessed an impossible situation, organized chaos into structure, provided leadership and expertise that transformed disaster into survival. That's what Valkyrie means. That's what you represent. It's not about individual kills or tactical innovations or legendary achievements. It's about being the person who steps forward when situations exceed normal capacity, who provides the expertise and leadership that brings people home safely. That's who you are. That's what your call sign represents. They descended from the aircraft to find the terminal area transformed into impromptu gathering space where airline personnel, airport officials, military liaisons, and what appeared to be reporters had all converged with desperate interest in the emergency landing. Chen noticed several Air Force uniforms, including a colonel who straightened sharply when he saw her, his face transforming into obvious recognition despite never having met her. The colonel approached with military precision, saluting despite her civilian clothes. Colonel David Park, Malmstrom Air Force Base. Ma'am. I monitored the radio traffic during your emergency coordination. When I heard your call sign. Ma'am, it's an honor. A profound honor. On behalf of the United States Air Force and every fighter pilot who's studied your tactics, thank you for your service and for your extraordinary assistance today. Chen returned the salute reflexively, old habits emerging. Thank you, Colonel. Just happened to be aboard when help was needed. Ma'am, nothing you do is, just happened, Park said with conviction. Your presence transformed what could have been catastrophic disaster into textbook emergency management. The first officer credits you with saving everyone aboard. The F-22 pilots who escorted you say your coordination was the most professional they've experienced outside of actual combat operations. You're Valkyrie. Excellence follows you even in civilian circumstances. A reporter pushed forward with desperate eagerness, camera operator filming. Ms. Chen, is it true you're a legendary fighter pilot? Can you confirm you're the same pilot known as Valkyrie who achieved 17 kills over the Taiwan Strait in 2008? Can you comment on how it felt to coordinate today's emergency? Do you consider yourself a hero? Chen felt the familiar weight of public attention, the transformation from private individual to public figure that she'd carefully avoided for 6 years. But denying facts seemed pointless when military officials were saluting her, when F-22 pilots were standing nearby confirming her identity, when her call sign had been spoken over open frequencies that half the military had likely monitored. I'm former Air Force, she said carefully. I provided emergency assistance during today's crisis because I had relevant expertise. The real credit belongs to First Officer Keating, who flew an excellent approach under impossible circumstances, and to the flight attendants who provided medical care and passenger coordination. I just helped organize communications and procedures. But you're Valkyrie, the reporter pressed. The famous fighter pilot. The legend. She met the camera directly, her voice quiet but firm. I'm Sarah Chen. I served my country for 23 years. I flew missions that remained classified. I retired 6 years ago to live quietly as civilian. Today I happen to be aboard an aircraft where I could help during emergency. That's all this is. Someone with relevant expertise helping during crisis. It's what any qualified person should do. Torres stepped forward, her voice carrying absolute conviction. With respect, ma'am, you're being far too modest. I've studied every detail of your engagement over the Taiwan Strait. I've analyzed your tactical innovations. I've tried to emulate your decision-making processes. What you accomplished represents the absolute pinnacle of fighter pilot achievement. Your call sign is legend for good reason. And today you prove that excellence doesn't fade with retirement. You organized this emergency with the same tactical precision that characterized your combat operations. You're Valkyrie. That name means something. It represents capabilities that very few humans possess. Webb added, ma'am, there are maybe 500 F-22 pilots in the entire world. We're supposed to be the elite of the elite. But every single one of us studies your tactics. Every single one of us tries to think the way you think, coordinate the way you coordinate, manage complex situations the way you manage them. You're not just former Air Force. You're the standard against which we measure excellence. Your call sign stops conversations cold because everyone knows what it represents. Today just demonstrated that those capabilities remain extraordinary even in civilian context. Chen felt the weight of their words, the recognition that her carefully maintained anonymity had ended definitively, that becoming Valkyrie again meant accepting public acknowledgement of achievements she'd spent years trying to leave behind. But looking at Keating's grateful face, at the passengers disembarking safely from an aircraft that could have become disaster, at the military professionals standing with profound respect, she understood that some responsibilities transcended personal preference for privacy. Fine, she said quietly. Yes, I'm Valkyrie. Yes, I flew the Taiwan Strait engagement and numerous other classified missions. Yes, my tactics are studied in military schools. And yes, I provided emergency coordination today because people needed help and I had relevant expertise. That's what the call sign has always meant, not personal glory or legendary status, but the responsibility to use extraordinary capabilities to protect people who depend on expertise I happen to possess. Today was just another manifestation of that responsibility. Nothing heroic. Just competence applied during crisis. Colonel Park shook his head slowly. Ma'am, with profound respect, you don't get to define whether you're heroic. The 189 people who live today because you organized that emergency get to define that. The fighter pilots who've survived combat because they learned your tactics get to define that. The military professionals who've studied your achievements and tried to emulate your excellence get to define that. You're Valkyrie. Your call sign represents something that transcends your personal modesty. It represents hope that impossible situations can be managed through expertise and courage and tactical brilliance. That matters. You matter. A commotion near the terminal entrance drew everyone's attention. The base commander from Malmstrom had arrived with additional military personnel, all moving with the urgent purpose of officials who'd learned that someone extremely significant had just landed unexpectedly at their airport. Behind them came what appeared to be additional F-22 pilots, their flight suits suggesting they'd been conducting operations nearby and had diverted specifically to meet the legendary pilot who'd coordinated emergency from commercial cockpit. The gathering transformed into impromptu reception where military personnel lined up to meet Chen, to shake her hand, to express the gratitude and reverence that her call sign commanded among warriors who understood what her achievements represented. Each person shared how they'd studied her tactics, how they'd tried to emulate her decision-making, how her legend had inspired them during their own difficult moments. She accepted their gratitude with quiet grace, understanding that denying their reverence would diminish achievements that genuinely mattered to people who'd built careers trying to reach her standards. Keating watched from nearby, finally understanding the significance of the woman who'd walked into his cockpit during crisis. "You're like the fighter pilot Michael Jordan," he said when she had moment between well-wishers. "Everyone wants to be like you. Everyone studies what you did. Your name means excellence." "It means responsibility," Chen corrected gently. "Excellence creates obligation to continue serving, even when you'd prefer privacy. Today demonstrated that some capabilities can't be retired completely. There will always be situations where expertise matters more than personal comfort. Valkyrie isn't my call sign anymore, it's an expectation that I'll use my capabilities to help people who need someone with my specific expertise." One of the newly arrived F-22 pilots, a major named Chris Hammond, approached with expression mixing awe and determination. "Ma'am, I was there. Taiwan Strait, 2008. I was a lieutenant, flying CAP 30 miles from your position. I monitored your entire engagement over tactical frequencies. 17 kills in 43 minutes while coordinating 4 separate elements against numerically superior forces. I've spent 14 years trying to understand how you managed that level of tactical precision under those circumstances. Meeting you is. Ma'am, you changed my entire approach to aerial combat. Everything I know about multi-element coordination came from analyzing what you did that day. Thank you doesn't seem adequate, but thank you for being the warrior who showed us what's possible when someone operates at your level." Chen felt the weight of his words, the recognition that her actions had rippled through entire generations of fighter pilots, that the person she'd been during that desperate engagement had shaped how warriors approached combat for more than a decade after. "Major, what's possible for me might not be possible for everyone. I had advantages, reflexes, spatial processing, tactical intuition, that exceed normal human capabilities. I never wanted anyone thinking they failed because they couldn't replicate what I did under exceptional circumstances." "Ma'am, that's not how inspiration works," Hammond replied firmly. "We don't study you to replicate you exactly. We study you to understand the upper limits of what's possible, to see what human excellence looks like when someone with your capabilities faces impossible circumstances. You raised everyone's standards. That's what legends do. They show us possibilities we didn't know existed." Torres added, "And today proved that excellence isn't limited to combat. You took a chaotic civilian emergency and organized it with the same tactical precision that characterized your military operations. That demonstrates something important, that true expertise transcends specific circumstances, that someone with your capabilities will make extraordinary contributions regardless of context. Valkyrie isn't just call sign for combat achievements. It's call sign representing human excellence applied wherever you happen to be. The evening stretched into long debrief sessions with airline officials, FAA investigators, military liaisons, and media representatives who descended on Billings after learning that legendary fighter pilot had coordinated emergency from commercial cockpit. Chen answered their questions with professional precision, providing factual descriptions of her coordination activities while deflecting personal questions about her legendary status. She learned that Captain Morrison had died despite the paramedics' resuscitation efforts, massive stroke, unsurvivable despite the flight attendant's heroic CPR. She felt grief for the man she'd never met but whose death had triggered the crisis requiring her intervention. Late that night, sitting in airport hotel room while airline arranged continuing transportation to Boston, Chen stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror and contemplated the person looking back. For 6 years she'd been just Sarah Chen, civilian, invisible and unremarkable, traveling anonymously and living quietly without the burden of legendary status. Tonight she'd become Valkyrie again, her call sign spoken aloud, her achievements acknowledged publicly, her capabilities revealed to world that would never again see her as just another passenger. Part of her resented losing that privacy, that comfortable anonymity where nobody expected extraordinary performance or recognized the legend behind the civilian appearance. But larger part understood that some responsibilities transcended personal comfort, that possessing extraordinary capabilities created obligation to use them when circumstances required, that being Valkyrie meant accepting that her expertise would always be called upon when situations exceeded normal capacity. Her phone buzzed with text messages from former squadron mates who'd seen news coverage, from military officials expressing gratitude, from pilots she'd never met thanking her for today's assistance and for years of tactical inspiration. She responded briefly to each message, accepting their gratitude while deflecting their reverence, maintaining the modest professionalism that had characterized her entire career despite achievements that inspired reverence from warriors worldwide. A knock on her door revealed Colonel Park holding coffee and wearing expression of someone who needed to say something important. "Ma'am, may I have few minutes?" Chen gestured him inside, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Colonel, I'm retired. You don't need to keep calling me ma'am. Sarah is fine. With respect, Valkyrie, you'll never be just Sarah to military professionals," Park said seriously. "Your call sign carries too much weight, represents too much achievement. Today demonstrated that. Every person who met you tonight, from first officer to F-22 pilots to base personnel, left that interaction inspired by encountering someone whose excellence they've studied for years. You don't understand the impact your legend has on people who've tried to reach your standards. I understand it makes them expect impossible things from me," Chen said tiredly. "I'm just human, Colonel. I have reflexes and spatial processing capabilities that exceed normal parameters, but I also have limitations and vulnerabilities and human failings. The legend of Valkyrie attributes near superhuman capabilities to someone who simply had advantages during specific circumstances." Park shook his head firmly. "Ma'am, I've reviewed every detail of Taiwan Strait engagement. I've analyzed your decisions, your tactics, your coordination of multiple elements under combat stress. What you accomplished wasn't just reflexes or spatial processing. It was tactical genius combined with courage combined with leadership that inspired others to perform beyond their normal capabilities. You synchronized 4 separate elements, managed weapons systems across 17 different targets, maintained perfect situational awareness while evading enemy fire, coordinated elements through changing tactical situations, and achieved victory against 8-to-1 numerical superiority. That's not advantages. That's excellence operating at levels most humans never achieve regardless of natural capabilities." "And today?" Chen asked quietly. "What did today represent?" "Today represented the same excellence applied to different context. You assessed chaotic emergency, organized multiple simultaneous requirements, provided command presence that allowed first officer to focus on critical tasks, coordinated communications with tactical precision, maintained perfect situational awareness throughout descent and approach, and brought 189 people safely home through expertise that transformed disaster into manageable crisis. Same capabilities, different circumstances. That's why your call sign matters. It represents approach to problems that succeeds regardless of specific context. Chen sipped her coffee thoughtfully. Colonel, can I ask you something? When you heard my call sign over radio frequencies tonight, what was your immediate reaction? Park smiled slightly. Honestly? Disbelief. Then excitement. Then profound respect. Then nervousness about meeting someone whose achievements I've studied for years. Then gratitude that Valkyrie happened to be aboard that aircraft when crisis required exactly her specific expertise. Your call sign triggers emotional cascade among military professionals because we all understand what it represents. You're not just skilled pilot. You're a symbol of what's possible when someone with exceptional capabilities accepts responsibility to serve at highest possible level. That's heavy burden, Chen said softly. Yes ma'am, it is. But you've carried that burden with grace and humility for 17 years since Taiwan Strait. Today just reminded everyone why that burden matters, because when crisis requires someone with your expertise, people live who otherwise would die. That's not burden. That's privilege. The privilege of possessing capabilities that make genuine difference during circumstances that exceed normal human capacity. After Park left, Chen sat in the darkness considering his words. He was right that she'd been privileged to possess capabilities allowing her to serve at extraordinary levels. Right that those capabilities created obligation to continue serving even when she'd prefer privacy. Right that being Valkyrie meant accepting that her legend would follow her always, that her call sign would trigger recognition and reverence, that people would expect exceptional performance because she'd demonstrated it repeatedly across decades of service. But being Valkyrie also meant understanding that legends were built from human moments, the decision to step forward when first officer needed help, the willingness to coordinate chaos into structure, the tactical precision applied to civilian emergency with same seriousness she'd applied to combat operations. Today hadn't been about maintaining legendary status. It had been about seeing people who needed help and possessing capabilities to provide that help. The legend followed from the service, not the reverse. Her phone buzzed again. Text from Torres, ma'am, just wanted to say tonight was privilege of my career. Flying escort for Valkyrie, coordinating with legend whose tactics I study daily, witnessing your excellence applied to civilian emergency, that's something I'll tell my grandchildren. You inspire us not through legend but through consistent demonstration that excellence matters regardless of circumstances. Thank you for showing us what human potential looks like when someone operates at your level. Blade sends her profound respect. Chen typed brief response, Torres, thank you for professional escort tonight. You and Webb demonstrated excellent tactical support during complex situation. Keep studying, keep improving, keep pushing boundaries of what's possible. That's what matters. Excellence isn't destination, it's continuous journey requiring constant effort. You're on right path. Valkyrie sends her respect and confidence that you'll build your own legend through dedication to continuous improvement. She hit send, then set her phone aside and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she'd continue journey to Boston, would visit family who'd understand that mom's quiet civilian existence had ended when circumstances required revealing legendary capabilities. Future would bring media attention, speaking requests, military consultations, all the obligations that followed from being Valkyrie revealed publicly after years of careful privacy. But tonight she'd saved 189 people. Had coordinated emergency requiring tactical precision she'd developed through decades of service. Had proven that excellence transcended specific circumstances, that capabilities cultivated through combat operations applied equally to civilian crisis. Had demonstrated to new generation of fighter pilots that being legend meant accepting responsibility to serve whenever expertise could prevent disaster. Her call sign had stopped F-22 pilots cold not because of arrogance or self-promotion but because it represented achievements tested through combat and proven through consistent demonstration across decades. Valkyrie meant something. It meant warrior who stepped forward when situations exceeded normal capacity. It meant tactician who organized chaos into survivable structure. It meant leader who inspired others through competence rather than rhetoric. It meant someone who'd been reading novel in seat 23C and had chosen to reveal legendary status because people needed help and she had capabilities to provide that help. That was the truth of legendary call signs. They weren't built through publicity or self-promotion. They were built through consistent demonstration that excellence matters, that expertise serves, that capabilities create obligation to help when circumstances require someone who can perform at extraordinary levels. Tonight F-22 pilots had heard her call sign and gone silent with shock because they understood they were coordinating with someone whose achievements exceeded their own impressive accomplishments. Tomorrow military professionals worldwide would learn that Valkyrie had coordinated civilian emergency with same tactical precision that characterized her combat operations. Future generations would study today alongside Taiwan Strait engagement, analyzing how she'd applied military expertise to civilian crisis. But for Chen, tonight was simply another manifestation of same principle that had guided her entire career: when people need help and you have capabilities to provide that help, you step forward regardless of personal cost. That's what service means. That's what excellence requires. That's what Valkyrie represents. She slept peacefully despite knowing her privacy had ended, knowing her legend had been exposed, knowing her call sign would follow her always. Because 189 people had lived tonight. And that mattered more than anonymity. That justified revealing legendary status that she'd carefully protected for years. That was why her call sign stopped F-22 pilots cold. Not because of arrogance. Because of consistent demonstration that when Valkyrie appeared during crisis, people survived who otherwise wouldn't. That legend was built through service, tested through combat, proven through consistent excellence across decades. Tonight had just added another chapter to story that military professionals would study for generations, analyzing how legendary fighter pilot coordinated civilian emergency from commercial cockpit with same tactical precision that had made her name legendary throughout military aviation communities worldwide. Valkyrie had returned. And 189 people were alive because she had.